Hey gang, thanks for tuning in. I'll try to make this video as short as I can, but I'm not going to make any promises. It could be half an hour, it could be an hour. I don't really know how this is going to go yet. I'm freestyling. This is something that I've been wanting to talk about for a few weeks at this point. I've kind of threatened to and then didn't follow through for various reasons. One of the drivers for wanting to kind of have this specific talk was a friend of mine sent me a video which I forgot to reply to, so sorry, David, not Elon Musk, I just lost his name, Peter Thiel, one of the bosses of Palantir, and one of the #1 funders of the Trump campaign. So basically, in this video, he was being interviewed, and he's talking about how we basically summarizing, we need some kind of alternative to the New World Order. It's not a good thing. And, people on social media were thinking like, oh, this is great. This is positive. Somebody like Peter Thiel and his position with his influence, Bilderberg Steering Committee, all of that stuff, and he's talking about, well, we need to move away from the New World Order. This is good news, right? No, it's not. We're going to talk about something today called the third attractor. And Peter Thiel and Alex Karp and all these guys, they play a role in it. And the first part of this is going to be probably new information for a lot of you that watch it, some of the language I'm going to use. I'll try to be careful and articulate what I mean as I go. The second part of this, once we establish what the third attractor is and why it's important, we're going to start getting into end times prophecy. So hang in there. So what is the third attractor? Daniel Schmachtenberger of the Conciliation Institute, he's a thinker. He's part of the, some people consider him to be part of the intellectual dark web. I don't know that he would, but there are people that lump him in with that group, the Weinstein brothers and guys like that. But essentially, he is, his whole life's mission is to look at the existential threats to humanity on a global level and kind of brainstorm and problem solve solutions. And as you can imagine, that's a really big problem. He talks about what he calls the metacrisis. And as far as I know, he's not the only one that calls it that. Various groups call it the polycrisis. United Nations, World Economic Forum, people in that sphere, they talk about the polycrisis. Of course, poly means many. So the polycrisis is the idea that there are many crises going on simultaneously, and they all have to be addressed. So you need transnational bodies like the WEF, like the UN, World Health Organization, and others to solve these problems. Because nation states, NGOs, churches, whatever you want to look at, whatever smaller groups you have chipping away at these crises, it's not sufficient because there's just too many. There's too much water coming into this leaking boat. And so, but Daniel, by using the word metacrisis, what he's getting at is like, there's a reason why we have a polycrisis. Okay, so if we are able to go through and systematically solve each one of these crises in the polycrisis, we're just going to end up right back in another polycrisis because of the underlying metacrisis that caused the polycrisis. So he is going above and beyond the way the governing bodies are and trying to get to the root of the polycrisis. And he has come up with the idea, maybe it's original to him, maybe it's not. To me, he articulates it so clearly that I haven't seen a need to look at other people. But he talks about these attractors, okay? The two attractors that we're looking at right now. And these are, if humanity is left in its current state with these polycrises and the underlying metacrisis going unresolved, we basically have two outcomes, two attractors, two ends that are pulling humanity towards its demise. One is catastrophe. And this can come in numerous forms. It could come in terms of global famine because we mess up our food supply and we all starve to death. It could come in nuclear war. War breaks out and everybody just gets nuked and that's the end of humanity. It could be anthropogenic climate change. It could be any number of things, but the idea is that if we keep going on the track that we are, humanity will destroy itself. We will self-terminate and maybe even destroy the planet. Now, conservatives balk at that, but if we slow down and think about it, the Earth does have a limited amount of resources, and we are polluting it very heavily. So take the politics out of it, but given time, who knows how long, eventually we will destroy ourselves and destroy the planet if we keep going on the track we are. It's a reality. I'm a conservative, okay? So it doesn't bother me to say that, because it's just a reality. We're supposed to be good stewards of this planet, and we're not. So it just is what it is. So the second attractor is, this is kind of where we're going. The governing bodies of the world, the United Nations, NATO, WEF, whatever, BRICS, they're all seeing this. And, you know, self-preservation of humanity, it doesn't make any sense to destroy what you want to rule over, right? So from their perspective, even though they are a bunch of greedy psychopaths, it doesn't make any sense to destroy the world or destroy humanity. They have no kingdom to rule over. And so the idea is that the actions that they are doing with Agenda 2030, Sustainable Development Goals, all that stuff, the Club of Rome and what they're implementing, all these different things. You know what I'm talking about. If you're anywhere remotely in this space for any amount of time, you've seen all the stuff, right? They're doing this because they're going towards the second attractor, which is authoritarian dystopian government. The idea is that we can govern, we can regulate our way out of catastrophe. So the first attractor is catastrophe. We all die. Humanity, ruins everything. And the second attractor is government clamps down so hard that we can't destroy humanity and we can't destroy the earth. They regulate everything so tightly that the tools and weapons that were normally available to humanity to destroy itself are not allowed to be implemented. Okay? So nobody wants that either. Now you could say the powers that should not be, maybe they do. I think ideally, just from a common sense perspective, a dystopian society doesn't really benefit them. We've been kind of conditioned towards accepting that in the movies, but I think realistically it benefits them to have something like the status quo, but to have more binding agents on it to keep it from getting away from their control. In other words, they need some kind of a balance to where they have the resources that they want and they feel like they are obligated to have, entitled to, they have a kingdom to rule over, etc., but it's not so crazy bad that they don't even want to live in the world, right? So I think that's really important to understand. And it's also important to understand this thought process, because when we look at end times, when we look at Revelation and Daniel and these things, we tend to think of it through a very Christian or very Judaic lens. We tend to think of it in terms of what the Bible says, right? And this is problematic, and I didn't always see it this way. When we look at the idea of an antichrist or an anti-Messiah, in order to want an antichrist or want an anti-Messiah and accept that figure, you need to have some idea of what a messianic figure is, and you have to want what a messianic figure has to offer. Otherwise, why bother? Now, Buddhism is outside of that. Atheism is outside of that. Agnosticism is malleable, but it's outside of that. Hinduism is outside of that. None of those ways of thinking have any concept of a Messiah or the need for a Messiah in the way that Christianity and Judaism do, and even in their own way, Islam. All the Abrahamic faiths have this idea of a Messiah. The rest of the world doesn't. So what's our mechanism if the idea is that the beast system, and specifically the Antichrist, is going to deceive the whole world, and the whole world, which would be those other people groups, are going to accept the anti-Messiah as a messianic figure, there needs to be a reason for them, because they don't have a setup for that in their worldview. It's not in their paradigm. This is where we get into the third attractor. The third attractor is something where you realize we're on a track to catastrophe or dystopian authoritarian rule. Nobody wants either one. So we need a third attractor. We need a third path, a third way to go forward as humanity. Now, I have posted videos that I'm pretty sure nobody watched because they're long form, and I don't mean this to be offensive, but we are conditioned to watching short form content. Sitting down and watching an hour-and-a-half lecture from Ian McGilchrist or Daniel Schmachtenberger, John Vervaeke, any of these names that are in this space, it's called sense making. They're trying to make sense of the world and problem solve. And the idea is that, like, if you can accurately describe the problem, you're halfway towards a solution just right off of that. Because if you're trying to solve a problem that you have under described or inadequately described, you're going to be solving something that may not exist. So you need to accurately describe the problem, and that's what these people are trying to do. And they feel like once they can accurately describe the problem, then we can start working for solutions. And on a practical level, these solutions primarily involve de-incentivizing bad behavior. One of the bad behaviors is what's called a multipolar trap. And a multipolar trap, think of it as an arms race. Okay, and this can be any group dynamic. It can be family against family, like the Hatfields and McCoys. It can be nation against nation, religion against religion, human against human. But the idea is that there's some type of a technology or some type of an implement that allows Group A, we'll say, Group A, to have some type of dominance over Group B. Well, Group B now has to match that or be destroyed. This is the logic. Oh no, they've got something that they can destroy us with. We have to hurry and catch up. So they hurry and try to catch up, but then they have to develop countermeasures, right? And then Group A is like, oh no, they've caught up to us. You just get this never-ending cycle. Whenever there's like if we think of in terms of gain of function, right? In terms of gain of function, the idea is that we have to develop this deadly pathogen before they do. We have to develop this deadly weapon before they do, because if they develop this deadly weapon first, they'll use it on us. So we have to develop it first so that we have the option to use it against them defensively, or if we need to, offensively. This is what we're looking at. This is a multipolar trap. And instead of both parties just standing down and saying, how about we just don't develop technology that can kill us? That's not an option. The option is, yeah, we're going to develop the technology that will kill us, but then we've got a race to see who's going to come out on top. That's where we're stuck. It's a trap. And people in power know this. They see this. And I think the more reasonable ones are aware of the fact that this is not sustainable. You know, like NATO is fighting tooth and nail, specifically America, to keep it a single polar world. They don't want China. They don't want Russia. They don't want BRICS. They don't want anybody coming along adding another pole or two, because I think that they realize that if it becomes a multipolar world, surely this will just keep escalating. So I think there is a rational basis for wanting a single polar world. What the problem is that every nation is going to want to be that single pole. U.S. wants to be that one pole. It's in Russia's interest to be that one pole. It's in China's interest to be that one pole. So we're right back where we started, in the same multipolar trap. Okay? So, and anyway, this is where we're going. And people see this. People in positions of power and authority, people that are in place to make decisions that affect us all, see this. And a lot of the higher up thinkers are looking for ways out of this. They're looking for other solutions. Okay? And this is where I think it ties in with the end times. Because if we're going to say, okay, the Buddhists, the Hindus, etc., they need some motivation to follow this messianic figure. We'll call him the Antichrist. They need some kind of motivation to do that. Well, what's their motivation going to be? It can't be religious in nature, because that's not part of their religion. So there needs to be a pragmatic reason for this. Now, the typical thing that I've seen, going back to Hal Lindsey and you know, things of that, and I think that's largely because of the Cold War environment that was dropped in. meaning like the late great planet Earth and things like that. But it's this whole idea that the Antichrist is going to provide a solution to war. That's all it takes. Is he comes along and says, "Hey guys, no more war! Yay! Say, I think it's bigger than that, because the nature of the metacrisis is that even if you take away war, even if all the nations of the earth were to completely disarm, there are still other ways to go down one of those two attractors: catastrophe or authoritarian dystopianism. There's economic warfare. There's all kinds of warfare that you can do without weapons, without conventional weapons or nuclear weapons. So eliminating war is not in and of itself the end of the metacrisis. It's not an end to the polycrisis. So it's going to take something more than that to get these other nations on board, assuming that that's what's actually going to happen. Now, we're operating on a big assumption here. The assumption is that all these nations are going to come along and follow the anti-Messiah. Now, if somehow or other the anti-Messiah does this thing and it's more of a regional with the Judeo-Christian nations, Europe, etc., then it doesn't matter so much if these other nations are involved. It doesn't matter so much what they think. But if we're going under the prevailing view that it's going to be a global thing, then yes, there needs to be a motivation for these other nations to come in line underneath the anti-Messiah. They have to want a messianic figure that is alien to their paradigm, okay? And so this third attractor, I think, is the doorway for the anti-Messiah. I think we will hit a threshold, we're heading there now, where enough people in places of power will realize, like the Peter Thiels, the New World Order is not the solution. But yet we clearly see that Peter Thiel's not doing anything different. He's not out there pulling money from New World Order affiliated groups. He's not pulling his money out and doing something parallel. He's pumping up AI. And I think the idea is that AI is morally neutral. And so AI being non-human, being morally neutral, if we get it to a point to where it's completely generative, then AI will rationally, logically help get us out of these polar traps and move us down towards the third attractor, away from the two that will destroy us. I think that people like Karp and Thiel, Musk, people in that technocratic group that follow Curtis Yarden, I think that that's where they're going to go, because they get their ideas and their philosophy from Curtis Yarden. And Curtis Yarden has talked openly about the idea that we need a monarchy. Mark Andreessen, he's one of these billionaires in this class, went on Joe Rogan and said, we need an oligarchy. We just need the right oligarchy. In other words, we need a counterbalance of power that can push back against the New World Order, the Bilderberg types, all of that, which are taking us towards the path of authoritarian dictatorship. And we need some other way to move us towards this third attractor. And this is where I think that guys like that are going. Now, how they're using Trump, because they're using Trump, make no mistake about it, how Trump fits in, I don't know. Trump is so erratic with his rhetoric and his decision making, I don't even know anymore. But I know that the people behind him, the backers, the Thiels of the world, and people in that class, I know where they're going. And everything that I've seen over the past several months tells me that they are earnestly looking for a way out of what they see coming. They're looking for a way out of what Schmachtenberger is identifying. But in my opinion, they're going the wrong way. And going this direction, where everything is AI-driven, everything is digital, it is setting up the infrastructure that can be used per Revelation 13. If I've talked about this before, if we look at the mark of the beast as something that shows allegiance to the beast, authority, and we look at like the seal of Yahweh or the mark of Yahweh, I've talked about in Deuteronomy and other places. If we look at that as obedience to Yahweh and acceptance of his authority, then, we're left with this whole idea that, you can't buy or sell unless you submit to the beast's authority. And the only way you can really reckon that is if you have just a complete jackbooted, 1984 style thing, to where they have complete control over you at the physical level, your domicile, or you have an all digital currency, you have an all digital ID, et cetera, et cetera. And this is being put out there already as a solution to open borders, as a solution to healthcare, as a solution to voting, et cetera, et cetera. So we're already heading towards a universal digital ID. And then, of course, once that happens, then you've got to log in with your digital ID to get on the internet and post on Twitter. And, of course, that's a solution to all the bots, right? Because the bots can't do that. So we're going to clean up the internet. You know, half the internet traffic is bots now. If you do this whole digital ID thing, biometric especially, you solve that problem. So it's a win-win all the way around. But once they do this, now we can say, okay, well, if you're not going to do the things that show that you're allegiant to our system, we're shutting you down financially. You can't buy or sell, literally. Even if you could somehow or other free money up, if you go to point of sale and you're required by law to do some kind of an ID transaction, well, then you're stuck there too. So that's where we're going. The actual buying and selling, the mark is not, it's not some kind of microchip. It's not some kind of actual device. You know, the mark is whatever you do to show your allegiance to the beast. But the infrastructure that's being put in place in response to the polycrisis, the metacrisis, will end up, in my opinion, being the infrastructure used to enforce the mark of the beast. But it won't be the mark of the beast. There's a distinction there. So I think it's really important to understand, and I've been wanting to do a video coming on for the past several weeks, even longer, and I kind of got started and I got sidetracked because I don't think the time is right, where I wanted to do, kind of get into my interpretation of who the beast is, and specifically who the Antichrist or the anti-Messiah will be. And a talk like this is necessary to kind of set that up. Because when I inevitably present that, whoever's interested, in my opinion, is going to need to understand how I got to that opinion and why I think my opinion is relevant. Otherwise, I'm just some talking head online. Who cares, right? So I just wanted to kind of put this out there. The third attractor, I think, is this drive towards fixing what we can all see as broken, the metacrisis. And I do think that there are people in positions of influence and power who legitimately, earnestly want to fix those problems. And of course, if you just think rationally, the lower you get down on the power scale, probably the more earnest you're going to be. And the higher up you get, who knows what your motives are at that point. And I'm not even factoring in the spiritual component, you know, the principalities and rulers in high places. I'm not even factoring that in with this. I'm talking just pure pragmatism, pure practicality at work and being used to make judgment by the powers that should not be yet are. So hopefully this wasn't too abstract. I recommend, there's some really good videos on this whole concept. I've shared some of them. Rebel Wisdom is a YouTube channel. They stopped posting a couple years ago, but they have a bunch of videos up, interviews of from Ian McGilchrist, from Daniel Schmachtenberger, and others, where they talk about this idea of the metacrisis, of sense making, which is a related concept in understanding exactly what we're looking at, how to make sense of everything. And I highly recommend that if you can sit down and digest the long form content, it will be well worth your time, because these are the kinds of thoughts that the decision makers are thinking. And if we're going to have any idea of what their next moves are going to be, it's kind of nice to know a little bit of what they're looking at, what they're thinking about, maybe what keeps them up at night. And so I think that this is really important. Of course, Ian McGilchrist, he has his own website. Schmachtenberger, he is with the Conciliation Project, as in reconciliation minus the RE, Conciliation Project. And you know, it's fascinating, but for all the wrong reasons. I will warn you, if you do watch those videos, Schmachtenberger does use some dirty words. I don't endorse that. It's one of those things that I just kind of clenched my teeth and kind of got through just for the rest of the material. So that's unfortunate, but he is secular. To the best of my knowledge, he's agnostic. I don't think he's atheist in the normal sense. I think he's just agnostic. So he's not thinking in religious terms at all. You know, and a lot of these people aren't. You know, somebody like Ian McGilchrist considers himself spiritual, but he's not a Christian. You know, so he's interpreting it with some degree of spirituality, but it's more of a humanist type spirituality. But these are some of the thought leaders that are influencing what is actually happening. So we can have this kind of vague idea of what's happening, and we can kind of have this paradigm and this worldview that, and have it not be accurate. And my intention with kind of bringing this to your attention is to kind of solidify a more accurate way of looking at the world, because the world doesn't think of things in biblical terms like the rest of us do. If you're watching this video, you probably do. They don't think that way. So just to have kind of a balanced perspective, and if you're going to say, well, James, we shouldn't really be getting into secular stuff, Paul was well aware of the Greek philosophy that was surrounding him. He was well aware of the Euclideans and the Epicureans and the Gnostics and the Stoics, etc., etc. He was well aware of all that. And because he was aware of how the world around him, the Gentile world around him, thought and how they functioned, he was able to understand a lot of what was going on around him, and more importantly, to interact with those people when he was sharing the good news of Yahweh's kingdom. You can't do that if you don't have any idea how the people are thinking that you're interacting with. So I encourage you, hopefully you're mature enough to be able to do something like this. Not everybody is, but I encourage you to look at some of this stuff and kind of get an idea of what the people around you are thinking. Get an idea of what other people outside of your echo chamber are thinking. Because, like it or not, we deal with people outside of our echo chamber, or at least we do in normal reality. Of course, people are increasingly putting up thicker and harder barriers around their echo chambers. That's unfortunate too. But anyway, that's the world we live in. So I'll wrap this up. Hopefully you enjoyed the scenery change. I know it feels nicer to be out here than in my big rig. I'm going to try to do videos like this more often. The downside is that since I'm not live streaming, I have to go in and go through the whole video editing process and upload and all that stuff, which is cumbersome, but it's worth it, I think, to get out of the truck. So anyway, thanks for tuning in. Yahweh bless.